What up, what up? Back with something on communism. I've been thinking about communism, and I gotta tell you, if I was in charge of a communist state, then it would be the best thing ever for me. Right? I would be all for communism if I was in charge of the state. But only if I was in charge of the state. If anyone else was in charge of the state, then I couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. Anyway, the question that I started with was, is communism contradicting itself? That's what I'm here to explore. And the two main things... Damn, somebody just pulled a nasty U-turn someplace. Could you hear the tires? Maybe it was a police officer or something. I don't know. Maybe their tires are just worn out on the tread. Anyway, we all know the main two slogans that communism uses. They put out there, and they sound really good. They sound really great until you actually start thinking about it. Right? Oh, and if you're wondering, I'm tired. I don't know why I'm so sleepy. I just am. I'm a little dry too. I really need to stop smoking. I'm just getting sick of feeling this way. I'm just getting sick of feeling like this. My sinuses are always kind of clogged. It just sucks. It's kind of hard to breathe sometimes. It really, really sucks. Anyway, tangent over. The two main slogans, right? From each according to their means, to each according to their need, right? And the other slogan, the worker should control the means of production, right? Now, what do these things mean? What do these two things mean, right? Now, from each according to their means to each according to their need is fairly straightforward, right? If somebody has the means to provide all of this, then it should go from the person with the means to the people who don't have the means but have the need, right? Say a farmer grows a bunch of wheat and he turns that wheat into flour, right? And there's people who are just hungry and they need flour, right? Well, the only righteous thing to do would be to take the flour from this guy and give it to these people because they need it and he's got it. That's what that means, right? Now the other one, worker should control the means of production. Now what does that mean? Well, that means that the people who make the product, right? They control the making of that product. But also, I believe it inherently means that they also benefit from the making of that product, right? I believe the whole point of this phrase right here was to get rid of this thing where the boss hires a bunch of people and they're all working in horrible conditions, making products for their boss. And the boss takes that product, he sells it for a profit, and he pays them their wages, which is, hardly anything compared to how much he made, and he keeps all the profit for himself, right? Keeps all the profit for himself. Whereas in this, right, profit is less cost, right? So after taxes, after costs, paying his workers and paying for materials and stuff like that, and taxes and all that other stuff, he keeps the profits, right? Well, so the whole point of workers should control the means of production, in my opinion, is that the workers are the ones who share the profits, right? That's what I believe the whole idea of that slogan even coming from. Now, do I think these statements are contradicting each other? Maybe not completely directly, but I do think in an indirect way, yes, they very much contradict, not complicate, contradict each other. Now, I think something interesting to note here is from each according to their means to each according to their need. Well, when I say if I was in charge of a communist state, I would love it. I could easily say to this, hey, I need all this stuff, right? I'm in charge of this big state. I've got all this stress. I need a giant hot tub. I need like 50 wives, right? A bunch of mistresses. I need a fat house with lots of dogs and exotic pets and gold and jewelry in order to help me, manage this stuff, because I'm doing this for the people, I need a big desk. I need a big fancy desk. I need a nice car. I need a huge property, and I need a private military. I just need it. All right, don't question my needs. Don't question my needs. Right? Now, the reality of this whole from each according to their means to each according to their need thing is who determines the need? Right? For instance, your parents, right? When you were a child, you go into a toy store, you see a toy, and you're like, Mom, Dad, I need that toy. What do they say? No, you don't need that toy. You don't need it. And it's true, you don't need that toy. But let's maybe go to another abusive, or let's move to an abusive authority figure, right? Those parents they're probably not abusive just because they're denying their child the toy, right? But let's go to, and we've all heard stories of abusive parents and abusive authority figures and all that, right? And so what happens if you got somebody like me in control of your communist state? Right? Well, I'm sorry, but not only do you not need a toy, but you don't need a nice car. You don't need a lot of property. You don't need, nice clothes. You don't need, lots of money. You don't need too much food, right? You can get by with a little bit of food a day, right? You can do it. Do it for me. Do it for everybody, right? Do it for everybody. Do it for the community that I'm in charge of, right? You don't need a fancy leather belt, or you don't need too much water. You can live off a little bit of water a day, guys. Like you can do it, right? Stop being selfish. Right. So I move on to my question. Right. If workers control the means of production and therefore earn a profit by selling what they produce, right, then how can the communist state seize the product of production? Right? Because if the communist state, or the communist belief in the state, right, believes that the workers should control the means of production and therefore share the profits of that production, how does it come about that the state ends up controlling everything, right? And by controlling everything, we're not talking about the means of production, because if you look at it at just face value, that really just means you kind of control the machine that makes the tank, right? You're just behind the controls of the factory machines. You're just behind the tools, like the axe for chopping the wood. You're behind the means of production, right? And by means of production, right, It means, oh gosh, if I just get rid of the word communism there, and we just go to control ways of production, it's a reference to the physical, non-human inputs used in production to produce wealth, right? Non-human inputs. What does that mean? Well, that means, material, finances, all this stuff, right? In economics and sociology, the means of production are physical and non-financial inputs. I mean, they say non-financial inputs, but let's face it, everything costs money. Everything costs something, right? Somebody's putting energy into that, right? It's going to at least cost food, which, costs more food because it needs energy. That's the fuel that we put in our bodies so that we can actually make things, right? The social hold on, where am I at? Non-inputs used in the production of goods and services with economic value. These include raw materials, facilities, machinery, and tools used in the production of goods and services. So, what they're trying to tell us is that when they say workers should control the means of production, they only really mean that the workers should use the tools you give them to make the goods. The worker should control the hammer in his hand. The worker should control the axe. The worker should control the tractor. The worker should control the plow, right? But the worker shouldn't control the goods that come from it, is essentially what's being said here, which I think is a complete bastardization of the whole concept. That, like, what this was born out of, right? Communism was born out of this idea that the people in charge of these factories, right, who owned the factory, who owned the machinery, who owned the materials, and hired the workers, right, that the people who own these factories and all these machineries, the bosses, apparently, according to this, the people who controlled the means of production before communism came along in, like, Soviet Russia, right? They're the ones who then got all the profits, right? And a lot of people seem to find that unfair because there was a lot of bosses out there that were like, yo, like, I'm going to pay you a little bit to work in my factory. You're going to produce these goods. I'm going to sell these goods, and all the profits from it go to me, right? And you get paid for your work, right? And people seem to find that very unfair because a lot of people were finding themselves in pretty bad conditions because the bosses were trying to make as much money as possible. And so they were, not caring so much about worker safety or workers' health or workers' livelihoods and stuff like that. Sucks to suck is kind of what the phrase was. And so the idea that workers should only just control the tools in their hands is rather, straightforward. If you have a tool in your hand and you're not in control of the tool in your hand, then something crazy is happening right there, and you should probably drop that tool. Maybe possessed by a demon or some shit, because if you're not in control of the tool in your hand, something crazy is going on. Now, how can the communist state seize the product of that production? Well, what happens is, in communism, the boss man becomes the state. That's what I'm seeing here. The boss man becomes the state, and the worker still goes home with nothing. They still show up to work. They still control the means of production. They still work the tools. They work the farm. They, push the plow and all that good stuff. but they go home with the same amount of payment, if not less, right? And some of you may be thinking, oh, but that's okay because the states provided them with a home, and the states provided them with food, and the states provided them with everything they need. Well, the state provided them with what the state has determined that they need, right? Because somebody's got to make that determination of someone's needs. And in the reality, most of the time, that's you and I. I determine what I need. You determine what you need. Everybody determines what they individually need, right? If you can imagine, just take a moment, if you will, right? And imagine what society would be like if the greedy boss, right, who before was just paying you kind of a shit wage in the worst case, and you were working in bad conditions, right? That was under capitalism at its worst, right? That's capitalism at its worst, right? Well, imagine if that greedy boss then got to determine what you needed, and therefore could pay you even less, and say, hey, you don't need too much, man. All you need is a, small cell to sleep in, a little bit of water, keep you hydrated, some food, right? Probably don't need any sex or relationships or anything like that. Wouldn't want you to take your mind off the job or anything like that. But imagine if you would, right? If that greedy boss then got to make that determination, because that's kind of what's going on when you're talking about communism, right? The main thing there is to each according to their need. Now, all of us may sit here and be like, oh, well, we all know that we all have these needs. We all have these same basic needs. And yeah, you'd be right. But, you're not going to be too happy when somebody determines that, oh, well, you don't need that much, right? You only need a little bit, oh, you want to buy weed? You don't need to buy weed. Yeah, sure, you may be stressing out. Oh, yeah, you might be in some physical pain, but come on, you'll get over it. You'll be fine. You don't need this or that, right? And you're like, yeah, but I feel like I could use it, and I think it'd be nice, and yeah, I kind of need it because right now my boss sucks ass, right? Right now my boss is telling me that I can do fine with a little small cell, no pillow, hardly any blanket, ragged clothes, torn up shoes, a little bit of food, a little bit of water. I mean, I'm alive, right? That's all I really need, right? And so that's where I'm at. Now, if there are any communists out there that disagree, I'm open for discussion. Now, another thing that I find very interesting, you remember back when they were talking about oh yeah, socialism, we want democratic socialism, and that was the left saying that, right? Or the right was really accusing the left of being communist. That's what happened, right? Left's right said, you're a bunch of communists. And they're like, we're not communists. We don't want communism. We want democratic socialism. There's a difference. Well, if we just put communism in front of this workers control the means of production and we hit enter here in Yahoo, you'll see something quite interesting. And that's this second one here. A little Wikipedia thing, and it's Wikipedia, right? So take it for what it's worth. Wikipedia. Haven't even clicked on it. Don't even know the reference, right? Well, that's good enough for the left, right? And anybody on the right's gonna just agree with me anyway. So, the socialist mode of production, also referred to as the communist mode of production. Oof. Looks like, socialists and communists may be the same thing. What's this? Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels used the terms communism and socialism interchangeably. So, apparently, according to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, the communism and socialism are the same thing. Now, they're not throwing the word democratic in there, are they? No, they're not. Right? And you may sit there and you may say to yourself, well, democratic socialism, it's got to be completely different. Because if everybody votes on what everybody needs, then we're good. Right? Well, not really. Right? You're talking about laws that would be passed that would then kind of be like, oh, this is what we've determined the needs, right? But, those laws, they need to be enforced, right? And who's going to enforce those laws? Probably the people with the force, right? Enforce, the people who have force. Sometimes it takes a little bit of force. Now, who would that be? Well, in the most part, that's going to be the state. That's going to be the guys who have the military, who have control of the military, who give orders to people in the military, and they're going to tell them, oh, you got to go enforce this, and they'll do it, right? So a bunch of people are like, hey, we need guns. That's the law. Communist leader says, no, you don't. Bring in the military. I've got all the guns that we're all going to need. You don't need guns. I've got the guns. We got the guns. I'm controlling the guns. I'll keep most of you safe. All right, I can't keep everybody safe, obviously, because, can't be everywhere at once. But also, at the same time, might need to kill some people who aren't going along with the plan, right? Because people need to work, right? And the reality of kind of socialism and communism is it's supposed to create this place where everyone's needs are taken care of. Well, if everyone's needs are taken care of, nobody needs to work. And if nobody needs to work, nobody will work. And if nobody works, then nothing gets made. If nothing gets made, then everybody's got nothing. And then people start to starve and stuff, right? And what happens? You end up with a society that's kind of fractured, right? You got the people who are like, damn it, we got to work in order to provide food so that we all don't starve to death, right? And then you got the half, it's like, all right, they'll do the work and I'll collect the food and I won't starve to death. That's what you end up with. You end up with the people who are like, shit, so this needs to get done. And then you end up with the people who are like, word, I don't need to do anything. It's getting taken care of by those guys. But then you end up in a situation where there's not enough food for everybody. Because these guys are making the food. It's going over here. These people are doing nothing, and they're taking this food. And so then that food has to get split up among everybody. Right? And if you don't have everybody in society all working at the same time to make that food, right, then you're going to have a shortage of food. You just are. Right? Because if you have people not working, right? You may sit there and be like, well, people are going to be working in other things, and there'll be plenty of food. Well, it all depends, right? Like the state, it all comes back to the state. Because say something happens and the state decides, oh shit, we need a lot of tanks. Well, looks like some people can't really keep working on food. They need to come over here and work on the tanks. Well, so then that's less food being produced. Right? Now you can sit there and say, oh, well, there's going to be improvements in technology and improvements and stuff like that. Yeah, but that's capitalism. All right, we're not talking about capitalism right now. Okay? Don't sit there and try to be like, oh, get out of the whole communist state, can't produce everything because you're going to, use the things from capitalism in order to produce the stuff that you need for your communist state, right? Because let's face it, right? If it weren't for capitalism, we'd never move away from slavery. We just wouldn't, right? That's my opinion. It is. It just is. Now, capitalism, well, actually, damn it, that doesn't make much sense, does it? I didn't write this part down. I only wrote down a little bit here. But, God damn it. What I mean to say is, hold on, I actually just forgot what I said. I did just completely forget what I said. Holy shit. Anyway, god damn it. No, I can't move on. Shit. All right. I'll edit this out. What I'll do. What the hell did I just say? You're gonna use the machines. Oh wait, I said something about capitalism. If it weren't for capitalism, we'd never move away from slavery. Well, yeah, actually, I think that does make sense. Communism sounds more like slavery than anything else, right? Because look at that situation, right? You had a plantation owner, and you may say, "Oh, but that's not communism because the workers didn't control the means of production." No, you're wrong, because the only thing that means of production, controlling the means of production means, is that you control the tool in your hand, right? So the slaves did control the means of production, right? Now, sure, they didn't own the tools, but they controlled the tools. It says nothing about having to own the tools in order to control the tools. It just doesn't, right? Let's face it. You don't have to own a car in order to control a car, right? You just get behind the wheel of it, turn it on, and start driving. Yeah, sure, it helps to have the keys, but, you know, if you're a slave, somebody handed you the keys and was like, start driving. Start driving. And you're going to do it because you pretty much got a gun to your head. Pretty much, right? And so, you look at that situation, and, well, from each according to their means to each according to their need, right? In that situation, the needs of the slaves was determined by the plantation owner, and in the worst situations, right, the absolute worst situations, those slave owners determined that, oh, these slaves don't need to live. Like, I could just buy some new ones. You know, it would cost too much to go and get this guy medical care, so, you know, just put him out of his misery and let's just go, you know, let's take that money that we would have spent on saving his life and go buy 3 more. You know? Like, that's the worst scenario there, right? And, you know, from each according to their means, well, you know, plantation owners, right, in this scenario, they had the means and they were the state. In just, you know, talking about their own plantations, right? Just talking about their plantations. The slave owners controlled the means, right? Which means all the profits from their slave labor, they had. And so then it was from their means to those according to their needs, right? Well, guess what the slaves needed? They only needed ragged clothing. They didn't need wives. They didn't need families. They only needed a little bit of food. They only needed some kind of shelter. Not good shelter, but something of a shelter, an excuse. You know, something that could be called a shelter. They didn't need necessarily a solid roof over their head. They just needed something, right? And this was all determined by the state, which in that case was the plantation slave owner. All right? And, you know, you may sit there and you may say, oh, no, in a communist society, the people own everything. The people own everything through the state, right? Because it's a collective thing, right? And, well, let's face it, you can't have everyone in the country sitting there saying, oh, I own this, and this is what we need to do with it, right? You're going to have just arguing and arguing and arguing and arguing until the end of time, and nothing will ever get done. So there has to be one person in charge of it, right? And you may sit there and be like, oh, we'll elect that person, and they'll be held accountable to the people. You may elect that person, but if they control everything, including, like, you know, if they're the ones dishing out the food, and they're the ones dishing out the water, and they're dishing out the clothes, and they're dishing out the homes and the property, right, then they can very easily find out, like, oh, these people don't agree with how I'm running things. I guess they don't need any more food. You may say, oh, that would never happen. Hitler happened. Stalin happened. Mao happened. Trump happened. So don't sit there in your mind and act like something can never happen. There's a reason why intelligent people never say never and never say 100%. They'll say 99.99999%, but they won't say 100%. Right? I mean, unless they're maybe talking about their physical exertion or their effort that they're going to put into something, right? In which case they'll be like, oh, I'm going 110%, 120%, 1,000%, you know, but, you know, we all know you can't really, you know, no such thing. Well, I say no such thing. It's an exaggeration, right? Because you're really just going 100%. You can't go beyond 100% when it comes to your effort, right? Now, you may make, you know, more than 100% in terms of return on, you know, an investment or something like that, but that's not you putting in your, like, energy and your effort, right? You can increase what your 100% does, right? Like when it comes to, like, lifting weights, and you're lifting weights, you're going 100% with your bench max, right? Well, let's say that's 100 pounds at some point, right? You keep going, you keep going, you keep going, and eventually you're doing like 225 pounds, maybe 300 pounds, because you've been doing it for so long, but you're still putting in 100%. That's still considered to be 100%, right? 1 is 100% of 1. 2 is 100% of 2, right? 2 is greater than 1, but they're both still 100% of what they're equal to, right? Now, this idea that this makes sense just astounds me, I suppose. I mean, I can't imagine what goes through somebody's head. If anything, I guess I should appreciate the innocence. You know, because these are people who have never had, you know, at least they probably did not grow up with, you know, abusive parents. You know, they probably didn't grow up, you know, lacking a bunch of stuff that, you know, they could have not lacked, you know, being sent to the room without food all the damn time when there was plenty of food there, you know, for no reason, that kind of stuff, right? I'm not talking about, like, people being sent to prison and stuff like that. I'm just talking about stuff, you know, where they probably didn't have it all that bad. They probably had a pretty nice environment growing up, and so, you know, when they look out and they're like, oh, there's all these poor people, blah, 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 it's like, yo, don't, like, you know, I appreciate your innocence, but you're about to shit on everybody's cake, you know? Now, my next thought is nowadays in America here, there's a lot of Marxists running around. Marxists, communists, socialists, it's all the same thing. Once again, this is Marxist.org. This is, you know, this is the Stalinists, right? Which is interesting. I would say that, but you know, I type in communism workers control the means of production. We come up with Marxist.org. We come up with communism, socialism. Communism and socialism are interchangeable, right? Like that's what it is. Owned by the workers but held by the state. Let's face it. It doesn't mean owned by the workers. It doesn't. If it did, that'd be even more fucked up. Right? If I went out and I bought tools and I bought material and then I turned that into a product, and then as soon as I was done making that product, it became the property of the state, and they came by and collected it and then do whatever the hell they wanted with it, and I'm just sitting there like, oh, okay, I guess I'll just make another one and do what with it, right? Hand it over to the state, I guess. Because that's it's simply not true that the means of production are owned, because that's not what it says. Workers should control the means of production. And if we go back to what this means, right? You see here, oh, the means of productions are owned by the workers but held by the state. What they mean is the products are made by the workers but held by the state. The means of production are not owned by the workers. And the means of production, it's held by the state. The state's going to control everything, right? If they want a tank factory someplace, it's going to be that someplace. If they want to move it another place, it's going to move to that other place. You know, if the state showed up and said, yo, move this tractor to that field and work that field, what's the worker going to do? Right? He's going to be like, no, I own this tractor. You can't tell me what to do with my property. Right? The state's going to say, you don't own shit. That's ours. And if you don't do what we want, then no more food. If you don't do what we want, no more water. If you don't do what we want, we'll just skip all that time. Be merciful. Not let you starve to death or die of dehydration. We'll just put a bullet in your head and give the tractor to somebody else who will do what we tell them to do. Simple enough. But anyway, as you can see there, we deleted the word communism because we're going to go back to what the other page said. Right, now this page, means of production are owned by the workers but held by the state. Not true. And that's Quora.com. That's Quora.com, and I've definitely seen that website before, and they don't have a good reputation in my mind, as it is. Now, go back over here. This is reference to physical non-human inputs used in production to produce wealth. Right? The means of production are physical and non-financial inputs used in production of goods and services with economic value. These include raw materials, facilities, machinery, and tools used in production of goods and services. The social means of production are capital goods and assets that require organized blah blah blah. Oh gosh, what is this? I'm looking for words because here it doesn't say that it's owned by the workers. It just doesn't, right? It's just describing the means of production here. It doesn't go in the thing. Workers' control can be contrasted to control of the economy via the state, such as nationalization and central planning, versus control of the means of production by owners, which workers can achieve through employer-provided stock purchases, direct stock purchases, etc., as found in capitalism. Right? In capitalism, all that stuff, the factory, the machinery, the tools, owned by the owners. Right? Workers' control can be contrasted to control of the economy via the state. Now, the state, right, and they say, such as nationalization and central planning, right, that's really just the state taking over your company. That's what that is, right? That's what Hitler did, right? Now, people today think that this kind of nationalization or nationalism, no, they don't. They couldn't possibly think that. They don't think that at all. They just think in terms of nationalism, patriotism in the country somehow makes us all Nazis because people were really excited for a political candidate, and they saw people who were really excited for a political candidate, and they, equated that to everybody who was excited for Hitler. And the only reason they could do that is because before Hitler came along, right, the people who were running the country ran it into the ground, and everything was shit. So everybody was excited for some new guy to come along who's like, yo, I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to make this country nice again. He just didn't mention, the other things he had in store. At least as far as I knew. It's very possible that he did, and he was making it very well known, but people just didn't know. In fact, I have heard something to that effect. I haven't read it for myself, but I have heard from somebody to the effect that, yeah, he said this and that about the Jews and all this other stuff, but people didn't necessarily hold on to that one. They held on to, rebuilding the military, national pride, all this other stuff, right? And so he did what he did, and people were about it because the people before him ran it into the ground. So naturally, these people were excited to have somebody come along who was like, yo, I'm going to fix all this. They were like, yeah. And it seemed he actually started to do something, and people were very excited for him. And so people kind of saw that here, right? Where the Democrats and Republicans had effectively, allowed this country to become stagnant. Virtually stagnant, right? It wasn't completely stagnant, to be perfectly honest, but it was very stagnant, right? Our GDP was very stagnant, and the reality of that is if you're not growing, you're dying. That's just the reality of the situation when it comes to countries and GDPs and stuff like that, and economies. That's just reality of the situation. You may be like, oh, that's not true. It's true. Okay, if your economy is not growing, then you're dying. Okay, that's just what it is in economics. Now, what I'm looking for here is the fact that the state really owns everything. In that last statement, they say, oh, this means that the workers own all this stuff. Well, you know how shit it would be if you had to buy the factory, right? Buy all the materials, buy all that stuff, and the state just took your work and did whatever the hell they wanted with it. That's even worse than if you just, didn't own the tools, didn't own the stuff. The state basically allowed you to use the stuff in order to make a product that the state then took, right? Wouldn't that be better than if you had to buy the shit and then they still took what you used to make? You still took what you made? Like, that'd be pretty bad. Don't you think? Am I wrong that? I don't think so. Anyway, I think that's pretty much all I've got. The reality of the situation is communism, it's not necessarily contradicting itself in this situation. But it is, what's the word? Oh boy, communism is rather, it's not necessarily contradicting itself, because that was the question, right? The start question was, from each according to their means to each according to their need. Is that a contradiction of workers should control the means of production? Right? Because if you're saying that the workers should control the means of production, then you're really just saying that they should work the tools. But, that's not necessarily how I want to use that phrase for this question. Okay, because in my opinion, this phrase, the whole point of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole point of this phrase is to say that the workers are the ones who should be sharing in the profits, right? They say, oh, control the means of production, right? Well, you could say, oh, that means they should own these materials and they should own this collectively and that they all share in the profits, right? Which, honestly, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think that's the pirate business model, which I find to be one of the best things. But it's very capitalist, right? Where a group of people come together, they elect somebody as a captain, right? It's, they don't all have to necessarily invest in terms of buying a ship and buying cannons and buying gunpowder before they go out and start raiding and looting. No, because let's face it, we're talking about the pirate business model. The pirates, what they did, how they made money was they stole. Now, that doesn't mean that pirate business model, right, means that your way of making money is stealing, right? That is, that's the pirate business, right? But it's not the pirate business model, right? Now, the business model, I think, is actually very good, right? In fact, I don't think it's communist at all. I think it's very, very, very capitalist that a group of people get together, right? Let's say they elect a captain, they elect a first mate, or they elect a captain, he picks a first mate, or something like that, right? Then they go out, they make money doing work, whatever that work is, right? Say they're making movies, say they're writing books, say they're doing reporting on the news, say they are farming, say they make a product, or something like that. What happens is the profits from their business venture get split up amongst the crew and the officers. Right now, sure, the captain gets the lion's share of the loot, right? And then as the officers, kind of goes that way. But in the end, even the crew, right, the people at the bottom of the profit share pyramid are still going to be sharing in the profits, right? Now, they may not necessarily be getting paid a wage, right, like an hourly wage, but they would be, having a monthly share profit share. Right now, of course, excuse me. Now, of course, if the company's not making any money, then it's rather risky, right? To not be paid an hourly or something like that. But you would hope that the company would have some cash on hand in order to keep the company able to move forward until a point at which they do have a profit to share, right? Now, of course, reinvesting back into the company, that kind of a thing is something that would probably be done by a vote, right? Either by a vote or that's something the captain would determine, right? The captain's like, all right, obviously I need to give you guys, your shares and stuff like that, but I think we need to take a percentage of this loot and reinvest it, right? Obviously we need to repair our ship, but at the same time, I think it would be best if we, bought a few more cannons, right? If we, bought some more pistols, if we had more swords, if we had some more sword sharpening tools, right? If we had more fishing nets, if we had, other things in order to help us as a company go out and, conduct our business, which if you were a pirate, your business would be looting and raiding and stuff like that. But if you were a farm, right, but you still, ran off the business model, your business would be growing food. But, I find that pirate business model to be very good. If that was the case here, right, where I think everybody can sit there and say like, oh yeah, it would be great if the people who worked in this factory all got to share in the profits, right? Instead of just getting like a base hourly wage and all the profits going to the person at the top, right? Because I feel like that's where this came from, right? Now, just as a business model, from a business perspective, right, the pirate business model seems very good, but it's very capitalist. It's not communist at all. All right, because it's not, from people according to their means to people according to their needs. No, it's look, this is your share of the loot. This is your share of the profit, right? Don't spend it all on rum and hookers when we go into the land, Don't do that, okay? Buy yourself a home, buy yourself a farm, get yourself a family, and we'll go out back on the boat, right? Save up a little. That kind of thing. Get yourself a horse or some shit, right? So that way when you come back from the raiding, you got another option. You got a peaceful option there. If you ever get tired of, having to kill other people for your for your money, you can always just quit the company and become a farmer. We're not going to hold it against you. Right? And so, I'm just leaving it with my last question here. I think a communist should imagine what their society would be like if that greedy boss that they hated and thought was terrible and didn't care about the workers and was the whole reason this school of thought coming forward in the first place, right? If that greedy boss became the state, and in this case, you can't deny it, the state is going to determine your needs. And you can sit there and you can say, oh, but democratically, we'll just elect somebody else. Good luck. Good luck. Right? Because if you got all the things in the country, you got control over everything. Right? Because let's face it, you may not be in control of the tools, but you're in control of what the tools made. And what did you do? Well, you had those tools make a lot of tanks. You had those tools make a lot of guns and a lot of bullets, and guess who doesn't have the guns, bullets, or tanks? The people who made them, right? The state has it. So, what the fuck are they gonna do? Not a damn thing. They're gonna shut up and get to work.